right. Welcome back to the Money Bear podcast. We are so excited for our guest today. Melissa Jean-Baptiste has one of the most amazing debt payoff journeys I have ever heard of. It's like shocking, and I can't wait to share that with you guys. But Melissa is one of my good friends on the internet space. We've actually never met in person, but we've talked a lot. Yeah, soon in Orlando. We're going to finally meet. But Melissa is the founder of Millennial in Debt, and I'll just kind of let her introduce who she is, what she does, and all the cool stuff she's got going on.
Yes, thank you for that remarkable introduction. I'm blushing. Yes, so my name is Melissa. I am the founder of Millennial in Debt. I am a first generation Haitian American, which is always super important to my story. So I like to always start off with that. First gen Haitian American, oldest in the family, first to go to college. And I paid off over $100,000 in student loans. And while doing so, created the Millennial in Debt brand, really just like as a outlet for people who had a lot of money shame or guilt around debt and just wanted a place to, kind of hang out, talk, learn, laugh. It's all about just the jokes and the humor while learning. And this is the brand we have today, and that's where it kind of came from.
I love it so much. And if you guys follow me and see my dancing moves, I will tell you what, Melissa's dancing moves put mine to shame because she can actually dance.
Barely. It's the same move over and over.
It really is. It really is. It never gets old. I'm always like, I should probably learn a few more dance moves because like people are gonna get tired of this, but like they never get tired of it.
Nope, just one trick. It's like, all right, just keep doing this.
You're like, that's all I got. So you have this incredible story that we've already mentioned of taking out essentially about 60,000, if I remember correctly, in student loans, but it ballooning into over 100,000 that you then paid off essentially in 5 years. So
Yep.
kind of tell us about that experience.
Yes. So, like I mentioned, first gen Haitian American. So, my parents were not born here. They didn't really, know too much about the financial experience in America. And since I was the firstborn, I kind of was like the guinea pig to do everything. So, first to apply, fill out a FAFSA, get student loans, all of that good, fun stuff. And so, I went through 4 years at a private university, which already was my first mistake. But so I went through 4 years at a private university. I came out with a degree in English literature and adolescent education. So I became a teacher. 2010, I'm like, okay, my next, adult step is to just work, do my job. And then in 2013, I turned 25 and I was like, oh, I should buy a house, right? Like that's the next step. You went to college, you got a job, now buy a house. And so I was reaching out to all these like real estate agents, and this one real estate agent was just like, "Oh, you were pre-approved for like $100,000." And I live in New York. $100,000 cannot buy anything.
You're like, am I gonna buy a shack? Like a
you could get a Barbie house is what you're looking for. And so I was really confused because from 2010 to 2013, I never missed a loan payment. I never missed any bills. I paid everything on time. My credit was pretty decent. So I didn't understand why I was receiving such a low pre-approval. And then he introduced me to the concept of debt to income ratio, which I never heard of before in my life. And he goes, yeah, well, your debt to income ratio is really high because you make X amount of dollars, which as a teacher, we know is low. And he's like, you have really high amounts of debt. And I'm like, oh, it's student loan debt, no big deal. He's like, but it is though, right? And so he's like, maybe you should contact your loan provider and figure out a plan to maybe accelerate your payments just so you can get a higher pre-approval. So that's when I call dear old Sally Mae and find out that at that point in 2013, I had almost $80,000 in student loans. And I'm like, I'm not great at math, but that doesn't make sense. If I borrowed a little over 50 and now I'm at 80 and I've never missed a payment. And so she's like, well, you're on the interest only payment plan. And so interest only is compounding against you, whereas investing compounds, in your interest. So every day, essentially, my student loans were getting a fee added onto them, the interest added onto them, and the $200 monthly payment I was making wasn't even covering the interest. So that means the principal stayed steady, the interest kept adding on. So my total was increasing instead of decreasing. And I cried.
Yeah. Well, because you spend all this time spending money, putting it down on your student loans. You spent
Yeah.
years. And
Yeah.
then to find out that it had only increased, I cannot imagine how devastating that would be. Just to be,
I I was just like, okay, I'm never moving out of my
yeah,
parents' house.
right, right. So I'm curious, when you had that, when you got on the income-based repayment plan, did they tell you it was going to be interest only? And if they did you understand what that meant?
No. So the income based, that's a really good question because a lot of people ask me, like, why didn't you do this? So the income based repayment plan that I signed up for in 2010, because I was on a teacher salary, those plans shift. So every year you kind of have to reapply or you have to send in like your W 2. And because I was making a little more money, not wealthy by any means, right? Because I was making a little more money, they shift you into a different payment plan or they end up essentially kicking you out of that income only payment plan, income based repayment plan. So I didn't realize that I was shifted into an interest only payment plan. I wasn't paying attention. I really wasn't like my focus or top of mind until she explained it to me and told me that if I stayed on this plan the way it was, that I'd be done paying my loans in 30 years.
You're like, wow, I'll be dead. Just
I'm
kidding.
like,
Hopefully not.
30 years. I just was like, I'll be so old. Like, I'll never be able to move out of my parents' house. I'll never be able to, do anything. It was just really devastating. And at that time, I didn't even have a savings account. Like, I was just kind of going off of vibes. As long as my bills were paid, I was just swiping that debit card, living my life. I'm like, all right, that's fine. And it wasn't. So that really lit a fire under my ass to really get my finances in order, learn about money, learn how to make more money because I did not want to live at home for 30 more years. My main priority or goal was to move out on my own. And I really wanted, again, first gen, it's like, okay, you have to be a homeowner. So I'm like, I really just want to buy this house, like to make my parents proud, to make myself proud, all of these things. And so I took from 2013 to 2018, I side hustled and sinking funded my way into paying off a total of $102,000.
Oh my
In
gosh.
December 2018, when I made that final payment, I cried again. These were like happy tears. But pretty much like that moment and learning about the mistakes that I made and how it kind of impacted my student loans really is what set me on the path to like learn about money, read about money, reconfigure my budget, do a budget at all, create a savings account. So that sad moment really, helped me get to where I am today. So
Yeah, I
I
feel
guess
like,
it's good.
yeah, well, it's one of those things like we have to have that moment of either sadness or shame or like, holy shit, like
Yeah,
to have that catalyst of like things
correct.
have to change. Because if you're just kind of like you said, if you're just going based off the vibes on the everyday today, if you're making a decent salary, may not be that tough. But when you
Yeah.
look at like the long term future and you're like, this will be my life for 30 years, like,
Yep.
no, no, I
Yep.
got to figure out how to get out of this. So how did you led us to where you had that realization that you were $80,000 in debt. How did it get up to 102? Kind of, was it the interest rates were so high or what was going on there?
Oh, yes. So I like to separate. So I had federal and private student loans. So a lot of the conversation that's going on now in the media, that's focused specifically on federal loans. Private loans are a whole different like ball game.
Beast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the majority and the bulk of the large amounts of interest that I was paying was towards my private loans. So when I signed those loans in 2006, 2007, 2008, I was just like, okay, I've got to go to school. And so they were around like 6% interest, 7% interest. By the time I paid off my final loan, one of my private loans said 16% interest, which is higher than a lot of credit cards, which is higher than mortgage rates, higher than car loan. Yeah, 16%. And
16?
I had one at 16. I had a few around 13 and 14, but they were all higher than the 7 and the 6 when I started. So I'm just like,
That's insane.
wow.
Oh my gosh. Well, and then on top of it too, since you were still pretty early in your career and you were on this journey, I'm assuming refinancing probably wouldn't have been that much better. Or did you even look at that during the process?
I didn't look into refinancing because I was just like, I need to get this done as quickly as possible. I was just like, I got myself in this mess. I need to get myself out of this mess. It was a lot of shame and embarrassment where I didn't want to talk to my parents about it. I didn't want to talk to my friends about it. I didn't want to do like the research around like, just pay this off, get this off your plate, go, go, go. And so I ended up just using the debt avalanche method. And I started off with those 16% and 13% loans. And I would essentially, what I would do, so let's say that loan was $12,000. I would save 13,000 for the year because I knew the interest was going to keep going. I would save 13,000 for the year. And at the end of the year, my celebratory moment would be to pay off that one loan. And then January of the next year, I'm like, okay, we're going to tackle this loan. And the important thing is people always ask, like, oh, well, what did you do with the payments? I still had to pay my monthly payments. You
Right.
still got to pay your monthly payments, but I was saving on the side for this specific goal that when December of whatever year it was came, I was going to have this big moment where I paid off the principal and the interest on one loan.
That's a really cool method. I like that you stuck to, rather than just being like, all right, every month I'm going to put $2,000 on my student
No.
loans. It was more like strategic of like, this is like, I
Yeah.
like the way you planned that out. And I haven't heard a lot of people doing it that way. I feel like most people do like, I think of it as dollar cost averaging, but the opposite
Yeah.
of dollar cost averaging of like, I'm just going to do the X amount for X period of time. What made you go that route?
Yes. So, like I said, I was on a teacher salary and I still had other like bills to pay and things like that. And for some reason, for me, and it's different, it's a psychological thing. Money is so psychological and emotional. For me, putting $2,000 one month and then paying my regular like $300 the next month and maybe like $500, it just didn't have that same psychological effect for me as it would when I would pay off, just like get rid of an entire loan and then refocus my, my energy on that next loan. That's just what worked
Hmm.
for me. But I know like some people really like the snowball method because they like to see, like those really small loans go away really quickly. It's all about what works for you, your mental, your emotional, but also your budget, right? So a
Hmm.
lot of times I couldn't afford a $2,000 month because I'm like, I'm barely making $2,000 anyway, but I can, save and side hustle. And as I'm side hustling, I'm like, okay, I can put an extra 300 into my savings. I put an extra 500. I know exactly what I have to do to get to this end goal by December. So that's what worked for me. That's like the organization in my brain, but yeah, it's
Well,
different
and
for
I think that's so important because finance is behavioral. I mean, there's a huge part of it that's just behavioral and psychological, and it's like you got to, even when deciding between the snowball or the avalanche or the method that
yeah.
you approached, it's all based off of whether or not you want the money win or if you want the psychological win. And it's like whichever one you're going to stick to is the one that's going to work. So for
Yeah.
those who are listening right now and they're hearing us say snowball method, avalanche method, etc., can you give us a breakdown of like what those are?
Yes, I'll start with avalanche because that's my fave. So the snow avalanche method is you starting off with debts that have the highest amount of interest and you're getting those out of the way first, as opposed to the snowball method, which is not the reverse, but you're starting off with the lowest amount, right? So if I have a loan that's $1,000, I'm going to tackle that as opposed to the loan that might have like 13% interest. I wanted to get rid of the interest because I was on that interest only payment plan and I saw how it compounded daily. I was like, nah, I can't. I was like, I'm not paying any more in interest than I have to. I need to get rid of those high interest loans first.
Yeah, for sure. So it's like what's cool about that is you kind of combined your own. A lot of people often say like, "Oh, the avalanche method is the mathematically smart one," whereas the snowball method is like the psychologically smart one
Yeah.
because you get those quick and easy wins.
Yeah.
Whereas you kind of like hacked it and you're like, "I'm going to do the mathematically smartest one, but I'm going to do it in a way that also is psychologically really rewarding for me." Where it's like I
Exactly.
get this moment of like, "Fuck you, student loans," once a
Yes.
year.
It was like my Christmas gift don't get me wrong, I'd be so sad seeing that lump money leaving my account
Right.
because you're like, "Oh my god, look how much money I have," and it's like, "No, girl,
Yeah.
that's Sally Mae's money. Send it, send it
Right.
through."
So
But it
since
was
you
nice.
since you were doing this like also on a teacher salary while living in New York, how the heck did you do this? Like did you just like not leave the house for like 5 years? Like what was your life like?
So there are a couple of things. I love this question because I talk to people about debt in such a different mindset because I did the opposite and I didn't like it. So in the beginning of those 5 years, I was very much a hermit. And it was very sad. I was very depressed because I deprived myself of everything. I stopped getting my nails done. I was like, no more waxes, no vacations, no birthday dinners, no gifts, nothing. Like I just was at home, like staring at a wall, and it was sad. And I feel like not that I wasted some of my 20s, but I really had a goal, but I feel like I could have, managed and maneuvered a little differently. So whenever I talk to people about debt or helping them set budgets and things like that, I'm like, put some money aside for yourself as well, because you still have to live. I'm not saying you ball out and go to, like, I don't know, Thailand or whatever, but you still need to live. And that's what I wish that I would have done a little differently, is not gone the completely hermit route, at least in those first couple of years. And then towards the end, where I had a little more income and I had a little bit of less loans, I was like, okay, I'm gonna, take this trip. I'm gonna go on vacation. I'm gonna do this. So I started to reward myself in smaller increments and start to add a couple of things back into life. But definitely those first 3 years, I was such a hermit, and I do not recommend. Like, I do not, 0 stars, do not recommend. You still want to have some sort of life while you're, tackling these financial goals.
Yeah, because 3 years is a long time. Like, and
Yes.
were you living at your parents the entire time, or was it just the first 3 years?
Nope. I lived at my parents' house the entire time because I live in New York. I could not afford on my teacher's salary to, like, pay these loans, pay my bills, and pay rent. So my parents very, very, very much, like, came through clutch, allowed me to live there. I paid, like, whatever bills I could pay to help support. I would buy groceries. You try to do, like, everyone listening, we're like, I've been there. You try to make it seem like you're an adult and add into the money, but definitely not having to pay rent was such a benefit during that time.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny, it's interesting hearing you talk about like that time where you really did buckle down, and like it sounds like you punished yourself. That you were
A
like,
little.
you did this and now you have to like live with this. And like, where do you think that narrative came from for you, where it was just like, nope, it's all or nothing? And to be fair, I think a lot of us do that, where it's like all or nothing. I think it's so easy to fall into that mindset because it's kind of how our culture is. It's like, especially like
Mhm.
at the time, I'm sure the loudest voice in the debt-free community was he who must not be named.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I think a majority of us do start off following that. I know I did. And I felt like, not that I deserve to be punished, but I felt like I put myself in this situation and I need to get myself out of it. And that was the only way at the time. I was 25. So I was just like, well, you can't get your nails done. Like, you need to put that money towards debt. Like, you don't have time to go, to a friend's birthday. You have to do this, you have to do that. And I think a lot of it was shame because I went to school. I'm supposed to be smart, right? Like, I'm supposed to have read the details. I'm supposed to have known. And a lot of times on social media, even now, we see like, well, you borrowed it, so you need to pay it. It's like, I understand
Like,
my actions.
wow. Yes.
Like, I understand, but there were so many nuances that I didn't know and that I wasn't aware of. And circumstances are different. I didn't have parents who, like, went through the same systems that I was currently going through to guide me. I didn't know. And people are like, well, you should read. My big thing now is you don't know what you don't know.
You
So
don't.
I'm like, what was I supposed to read? What was I supposed to like? If
Yeah.
I didn't know debt to income ratio, how was I supposed to know to, like, search that up? So
Right.
I I
You have
think. Oh, I'm
go
sorry. Go
ahead.
ahead.
No, 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 you go ahead.
I think that's where a lot of, like, the shame and embarrassment came from, was that I'm supposed to be smart. Like, I went to school. I don't know why I didn't already know these things. I'm like, all right, stay inside, figure it out.
Right, right. No, I think that's so true. And like you said, there is this like this unrealistic expectation that somehow as 18-year-olds we're supposed to like know what we're signing away to. And it's
Yeah.
like everybody always says, well, there is there is some kind of education you're supposed to do before you sign off on these student loans. And that's not for all loans. I don't think that's for private loans specifically, but like
No.
these predatory practices where we are like looping these children, you're a freaking child at
Yeah.
18, into these loans where they're going to be impacted the rest of their lives. Like the whole thing just seems predatory. And like at the end of the day, we're punishing people who want to better their lives. We're punishing people who like want to go off and pursue the American dream, as like, it sounds like some of those steps
Yeah.
definitely were like in line with the American dream of like
Yeah.
specifically going to the private college and like pursuing, being a teacher and things like that. So it's just wild. Did you in this like process, did you learn anything about student loans or about paying off student loans that surprised you, or like why doesn't more people know that?
Yes.
You're like so many things.
Yeah.
You're like, that's
Um,
kind of like my whole millennial in debt page.
yeah, my whole life. One of the first things I talk to people who are, like, going back to school or going to take student loans, You need to understand what subsidized and unsubsidized means. I saw it on the paper. I'm like, okay, I don't really know or care to know, right? Which is my own fault. But there are loans, the unsubsidized ones. So pay attention, stay tuned. Those loans start getting interest the moment you sign them. Whereas subsidized loans do not get interest or do not have interest added onto them until you graduate, and they wait a 6 month grace period. So if you graduated in May, they won't start adding interest into your loan until November. Whereas unsubsidized, which is the majority of the loans that are offered, once you sign that promissory note and you get that check and you go pay, for your tuition and your books, they start adding interest from that moment. So there were a few loans that I had, like it was like a $7,000 loan. By the time I graduated, it was like, oh, 7,800, 8,100. And I'm just like, why what, like, why are we doing this? I wasn't even keen on the fact that I could pay my loans while I was in school. That's
Mm.
another thing. I'm like, I wish I had known, because I had a lot more disposable income. I was working on campus and like buying sneakers. I could have thrown $100 at a loan or $150. So that is one thing I wish I had known, that I had unsubsidized loans that were gaining interest the minute I signed them, and that I could 100% make payments while I was going to school. I think that would have
Mhm.
shifted a lot of anxiety and sadness, in my older age, if I had known that when I was younger.
Right. I even remember thinking of like subsidized versus unsubsidized. I had unsubsidized loans and I had a lot of private loans as well. I don't even know. I maybe had like a teeny tiny one federal student loan. And I remember in college, and I remember being like a little brat and being like, "Pfft, everybody else's parents pay for their college. Like, why can't my parents pay for my
Yeah.
college?" But what I failed to recognize is that when I was in school, my parents were paying for the interest on my loans while I was in school. So they basically
Oh,
gifted me 4 years of paying off the interest. And the interest, like, that's no joke, as you
it's
obviously
not.
experienced as well. That's several hundred of dollars every single month. And they did
Yep.
that for all five of their children. And it's like, when I remember when they told me that, I was like, I don't even know what that means. Like, what does it mean? You're paying my interest. I'm in school. Like, how do I even have interest already? You
Exactly.
know, it's
Yeah.
it's it's just wild how the system works.
Yeah.
So if you could go back and do anything differently, either on your debt journey or in your money journey in general, is there anything that you're like, don't do this or don't do this way?
Yes, I and I always feel bad for saying it, because I love the friends and experience I made in college, but I think I would have chosen to go to a city or a state school, and not taken the private loans. That's
Mhm.
what I think would have been the best decision, because like I had federal loans, like just like you, not as many federal loans, but I had to take so many private loans to cover like the gap between what the federal loans covered, what my scholarship covered, and there still was so much left that needed to be paid for. And I'm like, I should have went to a CUNY or a SUNY. So those who are not in New York, CUNY is a city school, SUNY is a state school, and they're more affordable. They're not cheap. School is just not cheap in general. They're just more affordable, and I ended up working. So many of my colleagues and I were making the same salary, and they had no student loans, and we had the
Mhm.
same degree, same salary, and they were student loan free. And I'm just like, mistakes were made. Mistakes
Oh
were
my
made.
gosh, that's so wild when you just think about like the different places they're starting off at. It's like, can you
Yeah.
imagine being like 22 years old, having no debt, and just immediately being able to start investing? Like,
Correct.
granted, even, I think probably a lot of people who don't have debt at 22 are still not investing. That's not what
Yeah.
they're thinking about. But like to be able to have that option, because when you left, your student loans were how much originally? Like $1,000 a month before you did the repayment?
$1,100. And my check was barely $1,100. I'm like, oh, wow.
Right, it's like literally like your entire paycheck is supposed to be going to your student loans. Like,
Yeah.
how the heck is that even remotely reasonable?
I don't even know where. I guess I understand that the $1,100 was supposed to put me on a 10-year repayment plan. Like I understood the math, but I'm like, who can afford this at 22? Like you all saw the degree I got. You think I'm making a lot of money with an English degree? Incorrect.
Right, right, right. Oh my gosh,
So
it's just wild. It's so messed up. So,
I agree.
if you were telling somebody who was like, "Okay, I'm where Melissa was several years ago," what is my first step? What do I need to do? What are some of the tips that you would give them?
So definitely 100% you need to call the loan provider, and people don't like speaking to the loan providers. I also didn't. I preferred to run, but firstly, don't run. They will find you and your family, and like they will just drive you insane. So don't run. And you want to be proactive in contacting them because there are options that I didn't even know I had, right? So if you have federal student loans, there are 7 different repayment plans. A lot of times we only talk about the standard repayment, which is like the $1,100, $1,200, and then the income-based repayment plan. But there are so many other ones that we can, talk about, that we can get onto, that would fit better your needs or your lifestyle. So absolutely call to find out what are your options. Less options available on private loans, but even with like the refinance, right? Would refinancing be better for you? Would it give you some wiggle room to pay extra on your loans? Call the loan provider. I wish I had called them at 22 and had that conversation. This way would have lit, the fire under my ass a lot earlier. But that's definitely your first step. Second step, I always say, is sit down to have your first money date. I have money dates sometimes once a week, depending. Summertime, it's going to be once a week because summertime I get out of pocket with spending. But sit
Girl
down with
summer,
your first.
okay?
Yeah, I'm like, I will take it. I will take 3 of them. But you want to sit down and have money dates. That could be weekly, monthly, bi-weekly, whatever it is. And you want to sit down and look at your numbers. When I first sat down and calculated my net worth, sadness. But it was something that I needed to see and needed to understand. So I knew where I was starting from and I knew what I had to do to adjust in order to make improvements. And it's not going to be quick overnight. It's not going to be like, oh, I'm going from negative to $100,000 net worth, but at least you see where you started and the steps you're taking. Because every time my net worth increased, whether it was $10 or 10,000, that was a victory for me. But I wouldn't have been able to, celebrate or know that had I not sat down and started calculating my numbers in that time.
Yeah, truly. And what I love about the net worth tracking specifically is like it's your full picture rather than just tracking like what do you have in savings or what debt you have. It's
Yeah.
like, well, if you pay off your debt and you increase your savings, you're having a double whammy effect on that
Yep.
net worth increase. So it's like, I always say, I'm like, oh, yeah, I increased my net worth by $300,000 in 3 years. Well, I don't have a $300,000 net worth. I was just negative, like
Yeah.
almost $100,000 when I started. So now, now that I've got the $200,000 net worth, that was the big change. And it's like
Yep.
that number is so much more powerful because you're like, these are the impacts of like every decision that I make.
A hundred percent. A hundred
I,
percent.
I love though what you said about just talk to them because they will find you, they will find your family, they will find your children. They
Yeah. They're not.
they will
I've
hunt you
never
down.
seen. They will hunt you down, like your job. They will come to your job. I'm like, okay.
Even your social security paychecks, like if you
Yeah.
don't pay off your student
Yeah.
loans, it's the only debt we have that's like, yeah, we're gonna take everything,
Yeah.
and you can't get rid of it through bankruptcy. So it's just like
No.
it's purposefully predatory and it's like the whole system, and this probably sounds like a conspiracy theorist, but the whole system is essentially like get our young people in this country in debt so they have to keep working until they pay it off. And it's like
100%.
literally it's shackling like our youth. We're doing such a huge disservice to our
Yes.
communities.
I will never forget, which is crazy. If you guys don't know, read your promissory note because you will find it, especially if you have a private loan. I didn't realize that private student loans, when you pass away, they don't go away. The federal ones do. I was getting dark. I was looking deep. And I told my parents, I was like, if I die before these loans are paid off, do not pay them. I'm like, do not, because they'll go, even if you don't have a cosigner, they will go to your next of kin. And I'm like, can we stop? So private loans, check your promissory note. It's up to the company, those specific companies, to decide whether or not that they'll like get rid of
That's
your
so
loan if you
wild.
can. Correct. And I'm like, well, I guess so.
Wow, that's so crazy. Well, and that's one of the reasons some people and like life insurance is a whole other beast in and of itself. But that is why some people will get life insurance
Yeah.
policies, even if they don't have kids, while they're paying off their student
Yep.
loans, just like if they don't have, most people have life insurance through their work, but
Yeah.
it's like if you don't have life insurance through your work, or it's not going to cover your student loans so that your parents don't get stuck with it, or whoever doesn't get stuck with it, then it's probably not a bad idea to get a term policy. We do not like permanent life policies here.
Whew, they're gonna come after us.
I know. They're literally, it's like there's like hounds out there just waiting for somebody to say something bad about permanent life
I know.
insurance, and then they'll find
Yeah.
us and they'll hunt us
Life
down.
insurance and MLM like supporters. I'm
Ugh.
like, y'all are tough.
Well, what's crazy is like the IUL specifically are functioning as MLMs. So it's like
Yeah.
the male version of MLMs, because most of the time it's men selling life insurance products. And I'm like, how does it feel to be in an MLM?
Yeah. You're like, you're thinking short-sighted. I'm like, okay.
No, you're just not thinking.
Yeah. I've had so much fun on the internet with them. So
Yep. Just another day in the life of battling off trolls. Okay, so now that you are debt free, which congratulations, you reached debt freedom in 2018 when you turned 30, right?
yes.
Love that for you.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you.
what have you done with your finances since then? Like, what's been your main focus? I assume you're just like shoveling it away for retirement, living a little bit more. What do you got going on?
I got back into debt. No.
You're like, so I got my PhD.
someone the other day was like, "You're not a millennial in debt." I'm like, "I still have debt, y'all." But yes to all of the above, a little bit of all of the above. So I paid off all my student loans in December 2018, and then I signed a mortgage in 2019 January. So I was literally like debt free for 30 days.
Oh my gosh, you're like, this is uncomfortable. I need to have something like I need debt in my
Something.
life.
It is a different debt, but it's still debt. I don't know why people think like, oh, it's just a mortgage. I'm like, that is still debt. But yeah, so I have increased my income substantially. I'm no longer a teacher, so that has helped to increase my glorious gap, is what I call it. And I'm able to invest a lot more. I have a goal of $50,000 investing this year, which will be my biggest investment. I'm excited and devastated by the market being so volatile, but I know the long term game.
Right.
So I've been able to invest a whole lot more. I reached Coast Fire thankfully to my work mom, who made me start a 403b when I was 22. So
Amazing.
love her for that. But
Yes.
definitely my main financial focus is 100% investing, increasing my net worth. Want to reach millionaire status, by the time I'm 37. So I've got a little bit more time, but it is definitely liberating and freeing to not be shackled to the student loan debt. And that is why I'm such a huge supporter of student loan forgiveness. People are like, well, you paid yours off. Why don't you want other people? I'm like, no, I want other people to feel this freedom and start to enjoy and live life in a way that's going to build generational wealth and, financial independence. So that's what I want for everyone.
100%. I've never really understood the argument of like, well, you paid yours off, so like, why do you want that forgiveness for everybody else? And it's like, have you heard of empathy? How do you like I don't want somebody to go through what I have to go through, It's one of
Exactly.
those things that it's just there's a lot of we could do a whole episode on just that.
We can. We definitely can.
Okay, so I have one final question, but
Sure.
before we get to the final question, tell us what you got going on right now. Where can people find you? What resources do you have? How can they work with you? Give us the spiel.
Yay! So exciting. So you can find me on Millennial in Debt everywhere. Mill in Debt on Twitter, character limitations. But
So annoying.
Millennial in Debt everywhere. I currently focus in on helping people build generational wealth, and that definitely includes increasing your income. I am a huge, huge supporter of making more money, right? Like you want to save more money, you want to invest more money, you need to make more money. So I'm currently doing a career development course for securingmybag.com. And you can absolutely 100% join in on our freebie, securingmybag.com/remote work. So you get access to a remote job board if you're trying to no more commuting. Gas is very expensive. So that is what I am doing. If you want to join in, please welcome. Happy to have you. So we could all get, that millionaire status. That's my goal. I want to make as many millionaires as possible.
Yes, I love that. That's what I love about the finance community. I mean, we're all just out here trying to make people wealthy. Like
Yeah.
that's all we
Yeah.
want for you guys.
I want you to be rich.
I want you to be rich. We need more money in the hands of more people, and the world will be a better place because of it, for sure.
Agreed. Agreed.
All right. And we'll put all of those links down in the show notes as
Yep.
well. But final question for you.
Okay, I'm ready. Go.
What was your very first money memory?
Oh my God. That is a really good question.
Right? I love this question because it's so funny hearing what people's first money memories are, but it's also like something you never think of ever.
I do know my first money memory. It's with my parents. So and it's interesting because I was just talking about it on social media the other day. So my parents have been married for 33 years and they do not have any joint accounts. All their accounts are separate. They have their own money. They pay bills jointly, but they don't share an account. And I remember, I think I was like 7 or 8 years old. And we were like in some shoe store with my mom, and she was using, so they used to have a joint credit card. She went to use this credit card, she swiped it, and it declined. And she got so mad. So apparently, like my dad had used it to buy something and didn't tell her, so it was at its limit. So she's like livid, and she gets home and they're arguing. And I remember, and again, I'm 7 or 8 years old. She turns to me and she's just like, never combine your money with a man. I'm like, I'm 8. So
You're like, noted, writing this in my diary right now. Like, never, I don't know what that means, but I'll never do it, Mom.
And she still talks about it today. Cause I'm like, Mom, I'm like, you've been married for 3 decades. You could open a checking account. She's like, no, I will not. So
Oh my God, that's so cute. So did you listen to her? Did you follow that advice?
I did. I have never opened any financial accounts with a man, and I will not be doing so in the future. I will listen to my mama giving me advice at 8 years old about money. So I will stick with it.
I love that. That is so cute. And like, it's wild because like every time I ask that question too, I'm like, so how do you think that impacted you? And it's like, you wouldn't think these like little moments as a kid actually impact you, but they do. Like mine, and I tell it in the last couple of ones, but mine was essentially realizing that my brothers were really good at saving money and I was really bad at saving money. And I was like, I guess girls are bad with money. Like I was like, I guess it's a girl thing. And so forever, I just thought money was not something that girls really had to worry about or do. And so I didn't even unwind that one thought until I was like 27 years old. So it's just wild how these things impact us.
That's so funny. I love that for us. That we both were just like, okay, we're gonna take this and we're gonna use it in adulthood. We're gonna figure out.
Yes, exactly. Well, Melissa, it was so good talking to you. I cannot wait to see you in Orlando at FinCon. And again, yes, it's gonna be so fun. And also shout out, we're speaking on a panel together, which was announced today.
Excuse us.
We're kind of a big deal.
I'm so hyped. It's gonna be so good.
It's gonna be so much fun. So thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. And I think people will learn so much from this.
Yes, it was so much fun. Thank you for having me.
Of course.